managed with precision. Across the country, farmers battling increasing yield pressure, labor shortages, aging equipment, and unpredictable weather. Irrigation is no longer just about applying water. It's about applying the right water at the right time with the right technology to protect every acre. Good evening. Welcome to Rural America Live. I'm Tony St. James. Tonight we're joined by Valley Irrigation, the global leader in mechanized irrigation and remote monitoring solutions. From smart control panels to telemetry and automation, Valley helping growers stretch every drop further. And now they're putting real investment directly back into the hands of farmers through the Valley Irrigation Grant Program, giving producers the chance to win a share of $100,000 towards upgrades on their operation. Well, joining us today in the studio, two industry leaders with decades of experience really helping growers succeed. Right next to me is David Hula from Wrenwood Farms and world record corn. Where's the big belt buckle, you know, that come out like the heavyweight champion? Where is that thing?
Yeah, well, I don't know. My wife keeps me humble. She's got a crown that she put next to the bed. So that's about the closest thing to a belt buckle.
Well, before we jump in, and by the way, we also have Darren Siekman with us, Vice President of Marketing and Policy. And Darren, I'll bring you in just a moment, but let's start with David. David, a little background about you. Wrenwood Farms, where is it? And what are you doing?
Well, Tony, I'm third-generation farmer there at Wrenwood Farms. Had a chance to farm with my late granddad, my late dad. I farm with my brother, and I have a son, Craig, that farms with me. And, you know, my wife's there. She helps do the books. And, you know, we're on the north banks of the James River, so in Virginia. So you really don't think about corn growing in Virginia, do you? But we're on the banks of the James River. We farm some of the oldest ground here in the U.S. They're at Mainland Farms. When Captain John Smith landed at Jamestown Island, they did that in 1607. They moved from the island in 1609 and started farming Mainland Farms, and we've been farming that. And I know Darren don't want to hear this, but this was the first place we saw 300 bushel dryland corn, and then we've gone from there. You know, my granddad was a innovator. My dad was one of the first guys to grow 200 bushel corn in our area, and then, you know, we've gone from there on. And it's been a fun travel and a fun road to success. And, you know, without irrigation, we wouldn't have had the success we've had.
And see, I find that so interesting because you get quite a bit of rainfall, plus you have the river right there for irrigation purposes. We're going to dig into that a little more in just a moment. We also have Darren Siekman with us, Vice President of Marketing and Policy with Valley. All right, a little background about you. I've already cheated. Nebraska boy?
Absolutely. Go Cornhuskers, right?
Okay.
Third generation Cornhusker. We had a fourth generation Cornhusker, hoping for 5.
Well, and let's see, are we optimistic about the odds for the Huskers moving forward?
You know, one thing I have learned, my dad started taking me to football games 50 years ago, and I can honestly say I have never bet on the Nebraska Cornhuskers because I would be destitute if I were. So I have never been correct on that. But it's a lot of fun, and it's a pastime, obviously. Hence the name Cornhusker, right?
Right. Now, so tell us a little about your journey to Valley. It did start in ag.
It absolutely started in ag, Tony, and I would have never thought, again, I can't go back to 1609 like David does, although we loved a vacation there. But in the 80s, you know, growing up in Central City, Nebraska, out between, you know, literally not quite the center of the state geographically, having the opportunity to irrigate, and that would be for local neighbors and farmers, and that meant dragging a pipe out. And precision irrigation at that time was, as I opened up the gate on the pipe, am I going to 2 fingers or 3 fingers? And so now, and the other cool part was, my dad was a county extension agent. And so he did some of the very first irrigation scheduling trials where we'd go out then and take some old gypsum moisture blocks and put the leads in and really start thinking about, it's not just turning the water on when the corn starts to roll. And again, obviously David's the expert of that, but I never would have thought that would have led now to over a decade at Valley, where I've been so fortunate to travel the world, but yet really work, because Nebraska is still not just the birthplace of center pivots, but it has more center pivots than anywhere else on earth, partly because of the Ogallala Aquifer. But again, really driving now, increasing the productivity of the land and really helping growers out with those difficult decisions. And so we want to continue to upgrade now. We'll have 80 years next year. And again, the pivots now don't look like anything that even I would have grown up with in the 80s, much less what Mr. Doherty started back in 1952.
Well, I'm excited about what we've got planned tonight, and we're really going to dig in. You're going to get a lot out of this. And just the fact that we've got the heavyweight hitter here with us, the heavyweight champ of the world, David Hula. David, we're at the end of harvest right now. And so I just thought it was kind of interesting. What can we learn about irrigation, and what can we share with growers that you learned this year?
Yeah, well, this year, unlike part of the country, we had a great season. Typically in Virginia, we don't help the corn price stay low. Usually we do our part to raise the corn price because we're not usually adding that kind of yield. But this year, the state of Virginia probably had the best corn crop they've ever had. Now, that meant we had some moisture. Now, when you think about some of the things that we've learned, we're still, with irrigation, we've been irrigating since '85. That's when we put in our first pivot. And there were times, you mentioned earlier, we get plenty of rain. We get about 44 inches of rain a year, but it doesn't always come at the right time. So we had a couple weeks in there where we needed some moisture, we weren't getting it, or we had some hot nighttime temperatures. So we were using the tools that we have, the irrigation, to help cool the crop down and to give it some more supplemental water. Soybeans, we had a dry spell in soybeans, and unfortunately, most of our beans were dry land this year. So we only have about 27% of our acres is irrigated of the 4,000 some acres. So this year we learned a little bit about managing. And then when I think about the country, what could the country have learned? I was part of the Farm Journal Pro Farmer Crop Tour. And, we saw where some growers were not finishing their crop, and we understand that they had some southern rust. But also, if they had some irrigation, they could have finished their crop and get a little bit more weight and give it the moisture that it needed, because it seemed like the whole country had a little bit of a dry spell this year.
So I'm kind of curious here as well, and I know the answer, but I'm going to tee this one up for you, let you knock it over the fence. The days of having to go out and start the center pivot, you don't do that very often, do you?
Well, no, we don't. Not like we used to, Tony. When we first put our pivot in '85, we had to have a path to the pivot. My granddad, he didn't want to leave a couple rows of corn, so we were having to walk out there. And it was only a 4-tower pivot, Darren. So it wasn't a real big pivot. So, 750 foot to get to the center. And, we had to go physically turn on the pump. Then we had to go turn on the pivot and then dial whatever amount of water we wanted. Today, now the Western farms, we still have some generators, so we have to go physically turn them on, but everything else is done with their phone, just hit buttons. So yeah, and the value of that, just time. We all never have enough time. I mean, how many times, Tony, do you wish you had a 26 or 28-hour day? And
right.
Just like farming, we wish we had a longer day, and just to drive 30 miles to go turn on some pivots or turn them off is time consuming. So having the ability to do it with AgSense 365, on the phone, just like kids nowadays play on their phones, we're playing games with pivots, turning them up, speeding them up, slowing them down.
And Tony, it's not just about the time, but as David mentioned, we recently were able to talk to a grower that he found out just because he wasn't monitoring his pivot, he was underwatering by 30% of what he thought he was. So again, you think about that, if you're losing, in this case, he wasn't losing, it just plain wasn't getting onto the pivot. So that's why we really, really preach not just the remote start and remote control, but the remote monitoring as well.
Okay, Icon Plus. What is that?
So
what can you tell us?
No, thanks, absolutely. So this was, here, most people like the fall farm show season. So right before, in August, as we knew things were going to start, the irrigation season was really wrapping up for the year. we released the latest member of the Icon family. And what I mean by that is the Icon is the industry-leading control panel that, like David mentioned back in his day, you would walk or ride your four-wheeler to the middle of that center pivot and turn it on or off. Well, what Icon Plus does now, it's what we would call really a mid-grade. And the reason that we want that is because so many farmers have mixed fleets, or they may have, say, a pivot that's a little bit older. And so the ability to bring that remote monitoring and not require that trip to the middle of the field is so large, because as you just saw, independent verification is you're looking at 20% less labor, as well as 10% better uniformity through that. So that's what we really want to do with Icon Plus. It's a good introduction, and we think it's the ability to really round out, because we think even though we have well over 80% of our pivots across the country that are remote monitor control, we think it should be every pivot. And again, not just because we're in the business of selling control panels, because we know it pays off for the grower.
Yeah, and I keep thinking back to '85, and the communication we had back then is just radios. You'd key the radio and holler at somebody. And the fact now that we can do so much from just a smartphone and an app, but doesn't it still come back today to getting a return on that investment or an ROI?
Well, Tony, when a farmer's farming, most of us all have that passion. I wake up thinking about farming. And, when I was a kid, I think about back in the day when somebody has a point in time when they said, hey, I want to farm for a living. And I was probably 7 or 8 years old, riding a fender of a 4030 John Deere tractor. My dad was planting corn, watching a row marker go up and down. So, I remember that saying, all right, I want to do this. And then my dad, he's always done it, my granddad. Well, if it's something we want to do, if we're not making money, we're not going to do it for so long. And, nowadays, margins are tight. So when somebody's thinking about a pivot, either they have a pivot and they want to reinvest and do something, because we've changed some of their panels just so that they can have that access to the AgSense 365, or put up new pivots. You got to pencil it out. Well, if you were to look at my John Deere app maps, and you can see in the pivot what the yields are and out of the pivot what the yields are, it doesn't take long to figure out that we're getting more bushels. Sometimes more bushels don't mean more dollars, because you got the expense. Well, when we can get more bushels and make more money because we've been more efficient, fortunately where we are, water's not as big a deal. Because, me traveling the country, I understand the struggles of water. But, if we don't suck it up, it's going in the Atlantic Ocean. So that part of the ROI is not so difficult. But everything costs more, but you got to pencil it out. And there's not many times, even we at Renwood are looking at some more pivots for 26.
So we hear this word sustainability a lot. Do we have to start with the sustainability of being able to come back and farm again the next year? Because when you're talking all the way back to 1609, that's a legacy of sustainability, finding ways and making investments that are smart. Is that a good way to look at it?
Well, sure. I mean, as a grower, most farmers think that they're the customer. Well, we sell our crop to a customer. So first of all, we got to have a crop that's going to be marketable. And, you talk about Nebraska. What's in Nebraska? They think corn. Why is there so much corn? There's cattle. So they got to feed them. Well, you get in Virginia, we're looking at crops, corn, small grain, soybeans, because we got people and we got hogs, we got chickens. Well, all that says we got a marketable crop. So now, sustainable, we got a crop. So now let's try to get the most out of it. And, they don't build land anymore. We're losing land because of solar, we're losing land because of development. So we got to get more out of the acres that we have. What best way to do that is put up a controllable, as we like to say, and that's a pivot. Put up irrigation so when we don't get those rain events, we can keep the crop going. And then if the good Lord bless you and you get rain and you say, oh, well, I don't need to irrigate, well, it's still a tool. We can put fertility out. People can use it as a chemigate to put on fungicides. And so there's added value outside of just water.
We have been dealing, though, with low prices. Now, we're seeing a rebound right now, which really puts a squeeze on that bottom line and the margin. And, I'm just kind of curious here. Darren, is there, and again, I kind of know the answer here, is there a way that Valley is stepping up, trying to fill that gap, if you will?
No, absolutely, Tony. So again, we don't have to we don't have to continue to reinforce, it's challenging right now. So what we wanted to do is we came up with the Valley Irrigation grant, and we wanted it to be more than just a giveaway. I mean, yes, don't get me wrong, $100,000 is a lot of money, and that's going to be divided into two prizes, a $75,000 grand prize and a $25,000 second prize. And what you can do with those funds is really any irrigation improvement that you can think of. And that's why that local Valley dealer comes in, because we've talked a lot about technology and panels, but it could be something as simple as a nozzle. It could be an end gun. It could be some of the things that you have with your pumping. So as a result, when we listened to growers, this was something that they really wanted, because we just talked about sustainability, and it's not just the staying in business, but as David talks about, as my family's talked about, the real goal is to leave it better than you found it, and to be able to go to that next generation. And so that's what we're excited about, is that here's a way for us to give back and kind of quote unquote put our money where our mouth is, to say we're willing to participate, to let growers try this out, and then more importantly, and that's something that we feel strongly about, is tell everybody else about it. And so again, to put it out there to say, hey, this is what worked, here's what maybe didn't work so well. But again, if you go on to valleyirrigation.com/grant, the other nice part is, yes, obviously we want you to fill out the form, but just for coming on to the site, you're going to get a $50 voucher for use of anything that you want if you spend $250 at our local dealer. So this time of the year, we'd probably be thinking about parts. But again, there could be service calls, there could be things that you do. So again, that valleyirrigation.com/grant is where you can really start to dig in and talk about what can we do with our field.
Okay, Darren, I'm sure it's on the website, but what about eligibility for this?
Thank you. Yes, I get too carried away with that. So, our lawyers tell us you do have to be 22 years of age, so that's something. And then again, just trying, since this is the first time we've done it, we did ask that growers have 500 irrigated acres. And again, not because we're trying to discriminate or only reward large growers, but again, we want these things to have impact. And so again, in the meantime, let's work with people that have worked with us for decades and have a lot of machines that we can reach out to. So those, other than coming on and sharing some pictures and sharing some good ideas, those are the only two real requirements. You don't have to be a Valley customer. It's really about making sure that we're going to give back to a grower and then let him or her demonstrate how that really works.
So is it? Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think I just barely qualify for one of those. Just barely 22.
And that's kind of where you're a leap year baby, right?
Yeah, that's
Me
right.
too. Okay, no. I'm kind of curious here. Is it just something you fill out? Or, I mean, is it an application? What is it that actually gets you into this?
Right. So what actually, like I said, if you go onto that website, it's answering a few simple questions and saying, really, what do you want your plan to be? I have not reviewed them all. I looked at a few, and I will tell you they're very good. And what I mean by that is not because, yes, it helps if we have a topo map, or it helps if we have, say, some photos of the application or of your field. But what really helps us out is something as simple as, you know what, I've got some older pivots and all my gearboxes don't match up. And if I match up with new gearboxes, I think I can save a little bit in electricity and make my cost of application less. So it's really anything under the sun, but get on that website, that valleyirrigation.com/grant. And if for some reason you can't do that, I'm confident that you can go to our local dealer, because all of our local dealers have been through the training. And if you need to print it off, heck, print it off and mail it in. We are not picky.
All right, David, now that we know you're 22 and you can enter this, what would you, I just wrote down, if you were applying, what would you do?
Well, just hearing about it, because I really, being part of this Rural America Live, was the first time I really heard about it. And I'm thinking things that, whether replacing pivots, but I look at it as a way to make the pivots we have more efficient. We still got some of the older controllers, but then Nozzle packages. We like to have the sprinklers above the pivot. We don't do the drops because we're pulling out of the James River. I need to know if I suck up a catfish or got something plugged up a nozzle or sand. And then I think I heard you say earlier, Darren, about maybe some moisture probes. There's just all kinds of things that I think as a grower, and I would be looking, because you asked about Tony about ROI, things to make that pivot more efficient. Because we all got some poor ground. Not everybody's blessed to be in Omaha and have great ground and all kinds of water. So we got ground that needs drainage, and some of those areas that needs drainage doesn't need as much water. So any way to turn the pivot up to make it go faster, and then when we get into the sandier spots, to slow it down. So I see this as a great opportunity for somebody to get into it, and most growers are intimidated by a pivot. So,
hey, David, I got an idea for you.
Yeah.
If you just go on and apply, we are doing monthly giveaways of Icon Plus and a year of AgSense 365. So I'm going to think if we name you the winner, we're going to be in a whole lot of trouble. But I can promise you we'll put your name in the hat of our monthly drawing for the Icon Plus. That's something that we're doing every month between now and when we announce the winner in December. January will be the winner announced. You need to have your application in by December. So get that in by December, David.
All right. Well, when we get done, I guess I'll go do it during dinner.
Okay. All right.
ValleyIrrigation.com. And what was the website again to get to the grant?
It's ValleyIrrigation.com/grant. Irrigation grant. Just grant.
Okay. ValleyIrrigation.com/grant. There it is. All right, great insights from both of you. We're having a great time already. And you know what? We'll be taking some calls from you tonight as well. Our phone lines are open. 877-731-6733. Yeah, lines are open right now. 877-731-6733. Now, call in for a chance to win a Valley prize package, including a $50 gift card. That's right. It's 877-731-6733. Okay, coming up, we've got Tyler Fields. Tyler is itching to get up and share a little with us. He's with Valley Science and Engineering. And here's a challenge for us. We'd like to hear your biggest irrigation-related challenge in the field. Maybe you're worried about sucking catfish up or crabs up in it. Whatever it is, what's your biggest challenge? And we'll see if we can come up with some advice for you. Again, we're toll-free tonight at 877-731-6733. Stay tuned. We have more Rural America Live coming up. Welcome back to Rural America Live. We're continuing our conversation on irrigation, technology, and how growers can maximize efficiency and productivity on their farms. All right, let's welcome back Darren Siekman. We've got David Hula with us, and somebody new just kind of wandered in, but I'm glad you got here. It's Tyler Fields, Senior Global Director, Water Solutions. Tyler, these guys are pretty good. You're going to have to come with your A game.
Well, since one of them's my boss, I definitely have to come with the A game. So we'll definitely try our part over here.
Okay, so let's get a little background about you and your path. I know you're in Georgia, but you didn't start in Georgia, did you?
No, sir. I actually grew up in South Florida and down there on a dairy farm. And then through the years, worked on different cow-calf ranches and different things within the ag industry. And so as I decided to go off to college and be an agriculture engineer, with that, I went into the land and water resource discipline. Ended up back in Okeechobee. And fun fact, 10-to-1 cows per people. And so there was a lot of agriculture in Okeechobee County. And what I decided was working through projects, we had a bunch of irrigation projects. And I really enjoyed designing the pivots, working on the infrastructure for that. So that took me to South Carolina to be a Valley dealer. So I got firsthand experience of working with growers in the field. I mean, right there, like frontline, and that was invaluable to me. 2013, I came on to Valley working in the water management group, which is now the Water Solutions group, and we have our Valley Science and Engineering team. Within that group, we are made up of disciplines from soil scientists, geologists, engineers, We're able to use those talents and expertise to really work on complex projects or water limited regions with water issues. And we're able to really help get the water from where it needs to be to the pivot, but then how much and when to apply it.
Okay. By the way, you can join our conversation. We're looking for some challenges that you've had in the past on your fields. We're toll free at 877-731-6733. And we've got a few lines open right now. So give us a call, 877-731-6733. Tyler, I want to stick with you. Because that's a good question. And that's my real first question for you. Challenges and some approaches your team has taken. What can you give us there?
So there's been some projects through the years that, you could say were pretty simple for the team, not really, causing too much stress within the group. And then there's been projects where we have to work pretty hard. I mean, we've got various things from groups that want to know more about the sustainability of their wells. And so the geology team has dove off into that, and they're working to help show the sustainability of what a well can be and how to care for it now to make sure that in 10, 15 years, there's water in that field. And that's helping the value of the farm, but it's also helping you mentioned sustainability earlier. It helps that sustainability of that farm as well as it goes further. Another one I can think of offhand is we had a large farm that was going to pull water off of the river. And from there through some canal and then pipeline, and then it would have clusters without, through the system. And so we designed all the pipeline to get it where it needed to be, the canals where the water needed to go, and then the pivots would get water from those canals. And then all of it was controlled, to David's point, by the phone. They literally were playing that game.
That is amazing. And again, when we kind of step back, we've got to look at the ROI here. We talked about that in the first segment. But Darren, I really want to bring you back in on the Valley Irrigation grant. What additional, I'm just kind of wondering, I mean, we've laid out some of the things that you could do with this grant, but are there some additional things that come with this as well?
No, absolutely, Tony. So this is not just about, obviously the dollar amount's a big deal. But what we think is really one of our hidden gems is Tyler's group. And so the fact that if you're selected, we absolutely are going to do one-on-one, consultation, if you will, or just having a conversation, and really thinking about how we better utilize that along with their local dealer to really maximize that return.
And I think it's very important, Darren, to talk about how the dealer is involved in that. And we recommend highly for the dealer to be involved to make sure, because they know the local ground. So it's very important for that to be a part of that.
Okay, so the importance of the dealers there as well. Just one winner?
Two winners. So there'll be a $75,000 first prize and then or grand prize and $25,000 second prize. So the grand prize winner will get to come to Omaha in January. I know people are lining up for that. But despite that, we'll get you a parka and try and feed you a good steak and absolutely work with not just Tyler, but all of our expert engineers on site.
Will we fly into a new terminal yet? Have they
No
got the terminal?
No comment.
Oh, okay, well, I won't go
Bad
there.
question.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that Darren said, and both Tyler, is talking about the dealer. Now, I just first heard about getting a chance to work with your group and then the dealer. As a grower, you talk about ROI. We oftentimes look at equipment. I'm John Deere. John Deere, Pioneer, the Good Lord, and Valley. And so they're the things that make our success. But you can buy anything. There's competitive irrigations, but it's all about the dealer support. And that was, we worked with Benchmark Irrigation down in North Carolina, and Brian Christian and his whole group. That is their success, because whether it's maintenance or just got questions, support, just having that exposure to that dealer. And dealers are, that's that last 3 foot, and how important that is with a farmer. And having that access to the phone call, and I call Brian, we're pricing pivots now, and we get response right away.
I think one thing to think about with the dealer is we could kind of be that bench strength. So the dealer does a lot, and now we're able to come in and help them when it gets to that point where it gets too big, or they have other things to do, and we provide that bench from the Valley side. And so I think it's a great comment.
I'm also kind of wondering here, David, you hold some records here. A few, right?
A few.
How important has the irrigation part been to achieving those, and how?
Well, I mean, we know that we've been able to have success up to a certain level without irrigation, 330, 350 bushel dry land corn. But then to get to that next step, when my granddad was one of the first ones, or probably the first one in Charles City to break 100 bushels. My dad was one of the first ones, 200. Then we went to 300, 400, 500, and now we're at 600 and some bushels. So to have that, a corn crop or any kind of crop that you're pushing cannot have a bad day. And like I said earlier, you got to be able to control the controllables, and water is one of those controllables. And we use it not just to put water down, we use it to cool the crop down when they're hot. Sometimes we might do it in the daytime, sometimes we do it at nighttime. We've used it to put out fertilizer. I've yet to use air pivots to put out any fungicides or any chemicals because, right there, water quality, Chesapeake Bay. I'm sure you've heard of the Chesapeake Bay.
Right.
So water quality is pretty important. So we just didn't want to have a problem there, and we can control that a little bit better with the ground rig. So, but fertigating, that is a big part of it. And when you go buy air pivots in the summertime, there are times you want a stack of pancakes because we're putting out so much molasses. So if anybody calls tonight, which I'm hoping somebody's going to call, I can't read the number, but I'll answer every question they have, but they got to ask the question first.
That is a great point, by the way. It's toll free. 877-731-6733. 877-731-6733. And if you called earlier and I accidentally hung up on you, I'm sorry. Give us a call back and we'll do it again. 877-731-6733. Tyler, let's work you in a little more here. We keep talking about the grant application here. Getting the most of the funding here, what suggestions do you have?
I think taking a holistic approach of the farm. Let's look at operations. Let's look at what is a part of your farm that could be a lot better, that could bring more value, right? It doesn't mean go out and put a new pivot in a piece of ground you have. That doesn't always mean that you're going to be better at what you're doing. Is there automation? Is there controls? Is there all these other parts? Is there irrigation scheduling? There's a lot of things that can come into that. And so really want to hit on what can help your operation. It could be adding a corner arm to an existing pivot. It can be taking a 25-year-old pivot and retrofitting it to newer things. It can be sprinkler packages. There's just a long list of things. And so take that holistic approach. Don't just think about, I need to find a place to put a new pivot. It needs to be a whole farm aspect.
Okay, great insight here. By the way, we've got a lot more. We're 877-731-6733. Let's make sure I don't hang up on Carmen from Nebraska. Hi, Carmen. What do you have for us?
Hi, Tony. I would like to know, David is so well known as, the record corn grower. And my question is that how do you prioritize, given current economic times, how do you really prioritize your investments and what you should be putting into your farm?
Oh, that's a good question because, farmers can spin themselves broke if we're not careful. And when we think about irrigations and we're trying to push a part of the pivot, we don't take an irrigation and say, hey, we're going to turn this pivot into a 500 bushel crop. We're going to take segments of it because things that we do, and it might be a quarter of the pivot, it might be half of the pivot, depending on how size. And then we'll try to, first of all, we'll take some of that Pioneer seed. We might change population. And then we'll take that John Deere sprayer and we'll spray a couple extra treatments on it. It might be a little bit more fertilizer. But Tyler, you said something very important. You can't take a piece of ground and just make it better. You just got to learn what that piece of ground is capable of doing. So a grower's got to learn a little bit on that path to his success. So do some strip trials, and a grower never learns anything if he doesn't leave a control. So you do some with and some without. So we've learned this over time. And when we start thinking about the dollars that we're putting into it, we got to first budget, say, hey, if we're going to try to go for a 400 bushel crop, then we realize we need so many plants. we need so much fertilizer, because how often does somebody say, well, I'm just going to change my hybrid, and all of a sudden I'm going to expect a bigger yield? Well, if they don't fertilize for it, they're not going to get many additional bushels. So we do that, and then we start managing pests. And, you know, one year we had the cameras on the pivot, and that was so neat because we were seeing, you know, insects, and then we were also seeing disease pop up, and I didn't have to walk out in the field to find all that.
Amazing how we're using all this technology to get more out of the crop. And I just wonder, again, going back to this grant, Darren, are there some common mistakes or missed opportunities as we apply for this?
No, Tony, I would focus on the missed opportunities. And what I mean by that is it's just what David just talked about is don't be afraid to try. And again, like I said earlier, I'm impressed by the practical nature of the applications that I just took a quick look at. And what I mean by that is these aren't people trying to stitch together 37 pivots with some radio shot or do some sort of nozzle by nozzle VRI. Not that we wouldn't entertain those, but again, it's mostly about people that really want to make those underperforming fields and bring those up. And like I said, you just don't magically turn that into 400 bushel or 500 bushel ground, but you do that a little at a time, and that could be really just the basics.
Many producers are covering different fields. You know, the day of just having one field and that's it. I mean, you've got from one field to another, you have different challenges. I just wonder if you've got limited resources, multiple areas to try to improve, how do you weigh all this together?
Yeah, well, we first obviously you want to put pivots on ground you own. So the first pivot we put up in '85 was right in front of my dad's house. And then we added some more pivots there. And then we started farming some ground. And most of our ground is along the banks of the James River, has access to water. Well, their further western farm, you know, a couple large fields. Now, I'm in Eastern Virginia. We got a lot of small fields. Our average field size is 19.6 acres. That's less than 20 acres. So to have a big pivot, now we have one field that's 234 acres. So we got a 160 acre pivot there, has water. So we're not afraid to put it on rented ground. But then when we learned some of this ground was dug up for sand and gravel, and just doing some experiment, we said, hey, we can really turn some of this ground that's, you know, barely productive because they didn't build it like the good Lord did. You know, they came and took the sand and gravel, then put topsoil back on it. Well, we're able to get that ground to do 300 bushel corn with a pivot. So prioritizing that, and then you got to figure out where your water is. And then, you know, for Eastern Virginia, do we even have power there? Now, when I travel with total acres through the guys across the country, and, you know, you say, well, Iowa, that is like the best part of ground. We don't need a pivot there. Have you ever had to where your neighbor got a rain event that you wish you had? If you did, then probably odds are irrigation would have paid. So even on some of the best ground, you might not have to be as intensive putting on the water because they're sandier soils, you know, we got to water quite regularly. But you get in the Midwest and Iowa, you might just be able to put a little bit out and it lasts you for a week or so, but still you can see that ROI.
Wow.
And not being afraid to try, here's an extra $75,000 to go try it. And so it's a great opportunity to try something.
Great point. By the way, we're toll free 877-731-6733. Darren, I want to bring you back in because something David said really got me thinking. You go to Nebraska and we're not dealing with, you know, farms that are 19 acres, if you will, but we have corners. Talk about the corners, and should we be trying to get more from our corners?
We absolutely should. And again, we know that just by virtue of the design, you know, we've got a lot of square fields, right? We've got this stereotypical quarter section that's 160 acres, and we put that circle in the middle of it, and there's a lot of leftover ground, anywhere from usually 30 to 40 acres left over that's not reached by the pivot. Now, lately, we've got a product called Encompass Corner. And what that really means is it's still just an arm that extends from the pivot Absolutely. But what it's got is the latest and greatest controls, so that uniformity. So again, when you think about that, as that arm extends and comes back, what we want to ensure is if you want to put 1/3 of an inch or 1/2 inch of water down or 1/4 inch of water down, it's absolutely uniform through that whole application. So that's really, I'd say, one of those untapped resources that, again, as we talked earlier, there's 60,000 pivots in Nebraska, and unfortunately they're not all valleys, but the majority of them are. But absolutely, I can tell you that there's a big untapped opportunity on those corners that we can do a better job with, and we think we've got those solutions.
Okay, I'm trying to think of this right off of the top of my head. It was a famous economist that said the best way to predict the future is to create it. Okay, and I'll remember his name in a minute. But while I'm thinking about that, I'm just wondering, Tyler, can we take data and make some strategic decisions, some strategic planning decisions that will get us where we want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, data is everything, right? I mean, that we look at what's out there, what's available, then we bring it in, we analyze it, we can look at what's going on. To David's point, knowing that field, and with the technologies today, with the soil moisture capabilities, with all the other products that we have that collects this data, how can we look at it and really narrow in on where that best improvement could be? And so data really helps us drive to an actionable planning item where we can look at something, put it on paper, and then strategically lay it out to help become something better than what it was.
All right. Thank you for answering that. I know that was kind of a choppy way to get there, but the idea is there's so much data out there. How do we actually use it and make the most of it? All right, we're toll-free tonight at 877-731-6733. We're waiting for some of your irrigation questions or challenges that you've had to deal with in the past, plus a chance to win that Valley prize package, including a $50 gift card. When we come back, we'll take your calls live. We'll let the experts go to work. Let's put them to work. 877-731-6733. Stay with us. Rural America Live is coming right back. Welcome back to Rural America Live. It's been a great conversation with our friends from Valley Irrigation, from strategy to technology, and now we're shifting to something that every grower, no matter the size of operation, can relate to, and that's keeping your irrigation system up and running when it matters most. All right, got the experts with us. We've got Darren Siekman, Vice President, Marketing and Policy. Over here, we've got Tyler Fields, Senior Global Director for Water Solutions, and David Hula, the champion of all champions when it comes to breaking records and growing corn. And so we've got the experts, and we've got you on the line, 877-731-6733. Let's go to New Jersey and Henry. Hi, Henry.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for calling. What do you have for us tonight?
Well, there's one point. We have pivots. We run 40 pivots, and we irrigate tomatoes, spinach, and corn, wheat. We irrigate wheat and soybeans. But one thing that's helped us a lot with our pivots, and David could attest to this, maybe he's even done it, if you get a hard packing rain on a newly seeded crop, especially vegetable crop like spinach and tomatoes, or not tomatoes, spinach especially, or even corn, we run the pivot around, and a day or two later, when you get that hard wind and sun to bake that ground, and that softens that up, and we can get our stand to be even, where before, you got spots in the field that might come up a couple of days later, and David's a big person on leading to equal stands, and that works. It makes a big difference on how our stands and our crops are. And also irrigating tomatoes and stuff like that, it's very gentle on the crops, and it works out real well.
Henry, great points there. David, first, He addressed you there.
Oh, yeah, I'm about to jump out of my chair right now because way to go, Mr. Henry. But no, he's right. On getting the crop up, you know, that uniformity, because particularly when you get out in the Midwest or the West where it's dry, and, you know, they're dry seeding. You know, even down in the Delta where they might be dry seeding some crops, you know, they need some moisture to get it up. But also, maybe if it's been dry and you're getting ready to plant, sometimes watering pre-plant to get the soil conditions right so your planter can perform the best. Because there's nothing worse than to be planting in powder and then dry dirt falling around the seed. If we can get that moisture, because we want the crop to be surrounded by moisture, because when I think about the successes that we've had on our path to the yields we are, it's come on what Mr. Henry said, getting the crop to come up uniformly so that entire crop is growing in unison. And, you know, you don't have them late stragglers. And I didn't think about spinach or carrots or any of that. But, you know, I think about row crops, whether it's wheat, soy, or maize. All three of those are tremendous in that, what Mr. Henry had to say.
And I think it just really holds true that, again, whether you've been irrigating your whole life or you're relatively new to it, the flexibility, it's not a one size fits all. And that's the beauty of our machines that, again, if it's just to settle the dust, for lack of a better term, and get that germination done with a real fast pass, or again, you know, later in the year where you might need some deep percolation. So I think that really shows how flexible the tool is, and that, you know, you need to be creative about how you use it.
Yeah, not just to get the crop up, too. We might be putting out a pre-emergence or a post-herbicide with some residual, and we need to get it in the ground, because if the weeds come up through that, then we're fighting a different type of weed scenario. So it is a tool. It's not just like turning on the key to a tractor. It is a tool.
You know, I'm so glad that you said that, because we've talked about all this technology here. But, Darren, I just wonder, at the end of the day, is not the number one question we have, will it run?
Yes, sir.
When I push the button, will it run?
Right, right. So it's very, very important that we not just have the best machine in the industry, but we absolutely have the best dealer network in the industry. And again, David's talked about his dealer, and I'm going to tell you there's a fleet of them all across the country that we're very, very proud to have partnerships with and relationships with, because that preventative maintenance and taking care of that asset means that you have, that's probably about the only thing on your farm that's going to last 25 or 30 years and perform the same way the day it did that you bought it. So that's why we really say get out, and even if you're doing that work yourself, your local dealer and our website's going to have those checklists and things that you may not think about. You know, hey, have I really looked at a collector ring? Yeah, a flat tire leaps out at us, but there's a lot of pieces and parts on that pivot that absolutely you need to be taken care of, and then it will just push the button, and it's the 4th of July, and you're running free.
All right, we mentioned Iowa earlier, right? So let's go to Iowa. We've got Nick on the line. Hi, Nick. What do you have for us?
Well, here's what I got. I got a 620-acre farm on the Des Moines River bottom. And I got a drainage ditch that goes right to the center of it. There's a field that's 330 acres, and then there's another field right beside it's 145. And I'd like to run, if I was going to irrigate, I've heard or been told that you could run parallel irrigation with, like, my drainage ditch. And could I suck from the Des Moines River?
Okay, great question. Who wants it? Tyler?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think there's multiple ways, but we do have, you know, center pivots or, you know, turn a circle. We do have ways to track a field, and then there are ways to bring in and look at the ability to pump from that river as well. And then if we're talking about having to cross that drainage ditch, we would then use what we would call variable rate irrigation. And that allows us to turn off either banks of sprinklers or individual sprinklers, depending on what needs to happen, to make sure that when you're irrigating over something as a water source like that, you're not putting the water back into it. You're going to save it, put it on the field where it needs to go.
Or, and even though we do not sell them, our dealers know where to source them, or you can fabricate your own bridges. So again, if that ditch isn't super long, absolutely, it's not a trick. We see it all day, every day. I can show you several in Nebraska where you just take that pivot right over that, and you have a bridge. And then to Tyler's point, you shut the nozzles off when you go over the bridge.
It's just funny hearing him ask about this big field. And, you know, I talked to my dealer, and we're putting up 2 tower pivots, and they might just do a windshield wiper.
Right.
So, you know, it's just ironic that, you know, irregardless of where you are, get with the dealer and let them design the best approach that you have. Because, you know, again, we're looking at more, and they're going to be smaller pivots, fill in some. We can't do corners, but they're going to be smaller areas. And, you know, I applaud somebody from the Midwest even thinking about putting up a pivot.
Okay, so I've got another quick question here for you. Preventative maintenance. How important is that?
When we're done, you know, clearly we got to winterize it. Now, we don't get nearly as cold as they do in Iowa, so we make sure everything's drained out. But then the next thing I do is I call Benchmark and have them come do an inspection like Mr. Darren said. They check all the motors, they check the rings and all. And then before that, we were doing it ourselves. And we would catch the obvious things. It was some of those things that we just didn't seem to catch, like some of the contacts and the switches and all. So I'm a big believer in preventive maintenance. Since we've been doing that for the last 6 years, our only problem has been we're not keeping air in tires. So we just got to check them every once in a while, you know, just like your vehicle there, Tony.
Okay.
Next time you come on, David, we're going to have a solution for you. Because, again, tire pressure monitoring is absolutely on the horizon and available today.
All right.
All right. Hey, we got another call. Let's see if we can work in from Kansas. We have Leonard. Hi, Leonard. You've got something for us here?
I do. I had in our area 40 years ago, I was one of the first ones with a corner system from Valley. A lot of people laughed at me, but the thing is still running. We've got repairs at how much can I spend for repairs instead of replacing it?
All right.
As far as the grant.
Is that dealing with the grant, Leonard? I think
Grants, no.
Okay. Well,
is there a point where you're better off replacing rather than just continuing to repair?
Sure. And I think, again, I don't want to keep saying, call your dealer, call your dealer, call your dealer. But in Leonard's case, I think that's probably appropriate. And it's not out of the question, though, as I talked about in Compass, we do have technology packages that lay over the existing steel. And so, again, he can pick up that efficiency without having to replace the whole physical corner arm.
Well, I know one of the toughest things for us was that first pivot we put in '85 is replacing a pivot because you've already spent the money. So really, it's kind of like buying a tractor to replace a tractor. But the thing that we saw when we went from that previous different model and we went to the Valley was the technology. How much different it was and how much more reliable it was, because before we replaced it, we changed all the gearboxes to Valley. It just eventually wore out over time. So I think as a grower, you know, it's just part of the operation.
All right. We've had a great time here tonight. By the way, congratulations to Henry from New Jersey. Henry, you're the winner tonight. And again, don't forget to go check out the website, valleyirrigation.com. And Darren, if we want the grant, where do we find that?
valleyirrigation.com/grant, or call your local dealer.
All right, so there you go, valleyirrigation.com. And again, we thank you for being a part of this show tonight. We've had a great time. Just means one thing, y'all got to come back, okay? We'll do it again. We'll see you back here on Rural America Live.